Cloud. Okay, as always, it's just recording me. It's not recording your faces. If you see it spotlighted on me, you know that's how it's working. If it's not spotlighted on me, you always remind me to add the spotlight. So it's great to see everybody. We have been discussing in the last couple of weeks, or maybe I should give the background again, because as we always jump from one section to the next. We started off with Tanya discussing, am I good or am I bad? But really, the Tanya is a guide to how to live our lives. And so ultimately, we had to get into, in order to understand meaning and purpose in life, we have to understand who we are. So we started discussing the animal soul and the godly soul. We spent a bunch of time on the godly soul. Then we moved on now recently to the animal soul, and particularly things that are not considered holy. In other words, we discussed what the godly soul will want. It wants to do mitzvahs. What does the animal soul want? The animal soul wants to be animalistic. But in order for us to define what we should be seeking in life, what we're not seeking in life, we have to define what is holy and what is not holy. So last week we started to discuss things that are not holy, okay, things that are clearly wrong, things that are forbidden. So how do you know something's wrong, something that's forbidden, something that the Torah forbids? We discussed that if something is forbidden, what does that mean mystically? What does it mean in the background? In the background, it means that it's something that cannot be elevated. It is getting its life force from something called the shalosh klipot hatameh, the three unclean klipot. The three unclean klipot are vivifying that item, and therefore, because that's where its life force is coming from, it cannot be elevated. What does elevation mean? Elevation means when something becomes surrendered to God. Well, things that are coming from these three unclean klipot will never be able to become surrendered towards God, and therefore, since there's no surrender, they cannot become one with God. Last week we had a question though. We just wanted to understand. We said, what about things that are, on the one hand, prohibited to eat, which means they're coming from a life force, which is will have never have a surrender towards God. At the same time, you have they may be permitted to use. So, for example, you can't eat a horse, but you can use the horse, right? So how does that work? How does it work? How can you have both something that on the one hand is forbidden, the other hand is permitted? So I told you I would look it up, and I did look it up to an extent, but I have to read it further because I didn't fully understand it. So this may be a little advanced, and it's not going to be the main topic of our class, but for those who want to hear it, this is how it goes. Basically, there is form and there's matter. There's matter and there's form, if you want to put it that way. So, for example, let's take challah on Passover. Challah the rest of the year is permitted. Challah on Passover is not permitted. So what happens? Does the challah suddenly become how does it flip? How does it flip from being prohibited? From being permitted to becoming prohibited and then becoming permitted again, right? How does it keep jumping? So the answer is that there's the form. Something can have a forbidden form, but not forbidden inherently. Okay, so again, there's a forbidden form, not forbidden inherently. So for example, milk and meat. Milk and meat are separately permitted. Together, in the form that they become, when they're together, they become prohibited. If you want to explain deeper, it explains that one, they're from two opposite sides of the sefirot, and when they get mixed together, it's not good. It's a bad mixture, right? It's a bad mixture. It's the same thing, by the way, in physical, in this world. There's a lot of things that are, let's say, healthy by themselves, but you can mix two healthy things, and suddenly it becomes very unhealthy, right? So what does that mean? That means inherently the item is not a problem, but in its form, it's a problem. In the current form, it's a problem. So the same thing is with the chametz on Passover. That is why actually there's an interesting debate about chametz on Passover. One opinion says that in order to get rid of leavened bread on Passover, all you need to do is you need to spread it around. In other words, in the form that it's in is a problem. Once you spread it and throw it into the wind, it becomes okay. So the same thing we can say is about a horse. It's not, a horse is not inherently an issue. In other words, in its essence, it's not an issue, but in the form of food, it's a problem. And in the form of food, it's coming from the three unclean klipot, but its inherent energy force is not necessarily completely forbidden. However, let's say certain things like idolatry, it says idols have to be completely destroyed, right? Can't have any benefit from them. So idols, those stones that the idols are made out of, have now become completely forbidden inherently, and therefore have to be destroyed, not just not used in a certain way, but they have to be completely destroyed. Again, I have to read further into it, but they're basically, what I've been gathering is they're making a distinction between the item as it exists in its form versus the item in its inherent state. So that's all I can tell you for now on that. And now we're going to move on to things that are a lot simpler. Okay, so if you got it or didn't get it, I told you I would explain you something, so I had to do that. And if you're lost a little bit, listen, some of these things are mystical and they're deep. All right, so let's get to what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss chapter 7, which is page 92 if you have the book, but I'll share the screen in a moment. But I'm going to start with a question. What do you think is easier, to learn the whole Tanakh, to learn all the books of the Bible, or to eat dinner? What do you think is easier? Any takers?
Sounds like a trick question.
To eat dinner.
Eat dinner is harder because
to eat dinner is more difficult because there's less. It's an experience where you're totally free, and that particular book, there's a lot of how to live life and directions and guidance, and so you can kind of settle into that.
Mm-hmm. And eating dinner?
It's a time where you feel a lot of anxiety, and the reason you feel a lot of anxiety is because your mind is just kind of free floating. But when your mind is directed and guided in a particular way as studying Torah, there's more calm.
Saying there's more peace when
Yes.
when you're studying. Okay, good. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
Well, there might be more klippa on dinner.
Right, there may be. Depends what's being served. If I cook it, there's no klippa, don't worry.
Well, when you're serving it, it's not even dinner, but
Right, exactly.
no, what I mean by that is that the godliness of the dinner might be more hidden.
Right.
It might be more difficult to address dinner in the manner in which it's supposed to be addressed, as opposed to just food as nourishment to do godly tasks. Tanakh is a little bit clearer for most people. That's why I say maybe there's more klippa on dinner than.
Good. So,
and Torah is one activity. Eating dinner is a plethora of activities. There, as we study on Sunday at Talmud, there are so many intricacies of which blessings to say and when and where and how, and do you say it together? Do you say it separately? There's a lot of different intermixing things that occur even with a simple meal. So after the last 3 weeks of Talmud class, I don't want to eat anymore, but that's a whole other story.
all you got to do is wash for bread, and then it's simple. Except if it's certain type of pocket breads in the middle of the meal, okay.
Or if you have wine before, after, you don't want to have wine, but then you decide to have wine.
So it sounds like I have an educated audience here. People have been coming to the Tanya class for a while and Talmud, in which you've come to understand that things that are clearly holy and are in a sense a lot easier in life to do because the path is clear, versus eating, which has so many intricacies and so many places to fall. Okay, so that's going to be our discussion today, the middle ground of life, right? So last week we discussed the Torah study, the mitzvah, which is pretty clear cut. Yeah, sometimes it's challenging to do a mitzvah or whatnot, but in a sense, it's very clear, it's very straightforward what needs to be done. You do it or not, okay. But when it comes to allowable activities, that's where in a sense it's a lot harder, because it's a lot harder to get to do it right. So let us discover the mystical meaning behind this. Okay. So last week we discussed there was the 3 forbidden klipot. Those are things that are completely forbidden. So eating not kosher, eating pork, eating ham, serving idols, and all those things. And today we're going to discuss klipat noga. That is the second type of klipa, or vivifying life force for items in this world. And klipat noga means the shining klipa. So it has a certain element of it that shines. And again, all this comes back from the verses in Ezekiel, where it says v'noga lo savav, and there was a light shining around it. And this refers to the klipa, which has some light in it. So even though it's a shell, as we discussed, what's the idea of the shell? The shell is hiding on the actual fruit, similarly to some of these forbidden things. They're hiding the actual fruit, meaning they're there to give you free will, to give you choice. But then there's a klipa that is not just there to give you free will, but actually has some light in it. Okay. The way to look at it is thinking of it like this. There are like peanut shells. Those are hard, which you don't eat at all. So those are like forbidden things. And then there's like apple peels, or, pear peels, which are more soft, which to an extent you do eat them as well. Today, of course, they say shells have within them a lot of nutrients as well. But that's for another time. So this is the klipa, which is going to vivify all the intermediate things in life. So how do we know what belongs to the fully forbidden klipot and what belongs to the middle ground klipot? It's simple. Things that are forbidden by the Torah go in the 3 totally unclean, unholy klipot. Things that are things that are not forbidden, those will go in the middle ground. This is an important distinction, because a lot of times, in others, what we get from here is that things that are forbidden are not just like, let me put it this way. Sometimes people want to know, like, why is this suddenly forbidden? What's so bad about a cheeseburger, or what's so wrong about pig meat, or whatever it is. The Torah, based on our understanding of mysticism, the Torah is not just arbitrarily picking things, but the Torah is actually revealing to us that this item over here actually cannot be elevated. It has its life force from a klipa, which is not allowed to be elevated because it cannot become ever surrendered towards God. So again, the Torah, when it forbids or permits certain things, it's not just arbitrarily picking things to drive you crazy, but it's actually in the mysticism telling you what the reality of the world around you is. And I find this very meaningful. To me, it gives a lot of meaning to things that are forbidden in the Torah. It's not just, I want to test you, which it is a test, of course, but it's also letting you know what is the reality of the world around you. That is why, as I think we've discussed previous times, the word asur and mutar in Hebrew. We'll see if people remember. What does the word mutar in Hebrew mean? Anybody knows what does the word mutar mean? So mutar generally means permitted, but mutar in Hebrew also means unbound, untied. And the word asur, which is forbidden, also means tied up. For example, we say in the morning prayers, matir asurim, who unbounds those who are tied up. Okay? So what this means is that these are the language that we use in Jewish law. We say when something is asur, something is forbidden, that means it's bound up, being held back by the unclean forces, by the 3 unclean forces, versus something that's mutar, permitted. It's not bound. It's allowed to become holy in the right circumstance. Okay. But this is what we're now going to discuss. All right, so we explained there's something called klipa, things that are unbound. They're not bound by the 3 unclean klipot. But ultimately, as I said in the text message, this is going to be up to us. It's going to be up to us to decide what what's going to happen with this. So let's take a look at some text. Let's read some text. Okay. All right, so you see it over here. Hopefully you have the book, it's page 92, but regardless, okay. So let's read some text. So it says like this. At the end of chapter 6, we began to discuss klipos, the negative forces of the universe, which veil the presence of God and promote ego consciousness. The klipos we learned fall into two general categories. A, 3 completely impure klipos, whose dark energy cannot be redeemed, and B, a fourth bright klipa, klipas noga meaning bright, which tends to hide God's presence, but whose veil can be penetrated through focused intention. But in contrast to the things mentioned at the end of the previous chapter, which are derived from the completely impure klipot, like things that are forbidden, the following are derived from the bright klipa. So he says, number 1, the energizing animal soul in Israel from the bright klipa. So your animalistic soul is not necessarily evil. It's just animalistic. Animalistic means it wants to live, wants to eat, wants to go to the gym, wants to swim. Netflix, I don't know, depends what show. Okay. Which is embodied in your blood as stated above. Okay. I'll get to Netflix in a moment. You know, this is actually a good moment. I'll stop there, for example, before we get to the second category. So, for example, I would say like this. Let's say the internet. The internet itself, I would say, is the intermediary klipa, right? It's the bright klipa. The websites on the internet, some of them are clearly of the 3 forbidden klipot, like political websites. Okay, no, I'm kidding. But all right. Right. Some of them are clearly the 3 forbidden klipot, but a lot of them, and then some of them are clearly holy, like yichabad.com and our fundraising pages, of course, as well. But then you have Chabad.org, you know, then JLI.com. Then you have intermediate websites, which can be used for good or for bad. And so that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about here. We're really, forget about websites. The internet itself has the propensity to be both holy and unclean at the same time, right? The internet can be used as a tool for either way. Similarly, for example, when TVs started coming around, many groups wanted to ban TVs, and the Rabbi said that TV inherently is not bad. TV is not inherently bad. It's how you use it. And therefore, the Rebbe said we should broadcast the Farbrengens. We should broadcast the Rebbe's talks throughout the world on TV. And so they got the satellites and they would broadcast the Rebbe's talks we needed Farbrengen. And I know some people who became close to Judaism from just flipping their TV channels and seeing the Rebbe talk on TV. If you recall, back in the day also, TVs used to have this non-profit station. They had to have one free station for non-profits. You know, for many years, my father was on there, and many other Chabad rabbis would utilize that to do an hour a week on these TV stations. So these are some of the things that are intermediate. In other words, a kosher channel, well, I shouldn't say kosher channel, an actual religious channel, of course, is holy, but the TV itself or the internet itself would be intermediate. Okay, let's give another example. The souls of kosher cattle, animals, birds, and fish, which are permissible to eat, these are all intermediate, which means they can be raised. Bright klipa being the sustenance and life force of everything that is permissible to eat from the mineral and vegetable worlds. So there are some vegetables we're not allowed to eat, right? So it's particularly in Israel, certain vegetable, you know, or if you grow, if a Jew grows combined, you know, if a Jew grafts things together as a problem, but otherwise vegetables are kosher. Then he says, bright klipa is also the sustenance and life force of every worldly act, spoken word or thought that has no trace of religious prohibition in neither root nor branch from the 365 prohibitions and their officers in biblical rabbinic. So when you talk, are you saying forbidden or permitted? Well, it depends what you're saying. Why is such an activity considered to be from klipa, the dark energy of the universe, if it is not prohibited in Torah in any way? You know, let me go back for a second before I get to that. I want to make a list of it here. I want you guys to figure this out. What is considered holy and what is, let me see if I can pull this over here in a second. Let's see how well everybody's been listening. All right, do you see this Excel box? Is this being shared on the screen, Excel box? Yeah, so let's take a look at, so we're gonna have different forms in the world, right? Different types of life force. Then we're gonna decide, is it, what part of it would be, let's say, holy? What part of it would be middle? What part of it would be unholy? All right, so let's take a look. Let's pick, let's start with the animal world. So what would be a holy animal? What would be holy from the animal world? Based on what we know from the Tanya. This graph will help you live your life and make decisions about what to do. So what in the animal world is holy? Or has become holy?
But it has split hoofs and chews its cud.
Okay, that would be the middle ground. The animal is middle ground.
One that's been shechted already?
No, not either when it's been shechted, not necessarily. It's still, anybody can eat it with any type of intention. What is already holy? So I'll give one example, the tefillin and mezuzahs. Okay, they are written on parchment. Okay, those are now currently holy. I would of course also say, offerings in the temple. Okay, middle ground would be, let's say, kosher animals, right? Or kosher animals. Okay, even once slaughtered. Okay, before they're eaten, as we're going to discuss soon, your choice in this column makes all the difference. See over here, the tefillin and mezuzahs are already holy. If you use tefillin in the wrong way, you're desecrating the tefillin, but the tefillin are inherently holy, okay? You're taking something holy and doing something bad to it. But once it's holy, it's holy. That's why the only thing you can do now is bury it, okay? It's kedusha, it's holy. These over here will maybe holy, maybe not. Depends what you do with it. You can, in fact, even take kosher meat and now mix it with milk and make a cheeseburger. And it's definitely bad. All right, but let's pick what's not holy. Obviously, unholy would be non-kosher animals, okay? Non-kosher animals. Okay, all right, let's find something in the plant world. All right, what's holy in the plant world? Anything that comes from a plant, any derivative of a plant that you could tell me that's holy?
Like a girdle?
Like a silk gartel, yes. Okay, what else? Well, actually, that if it's silk, it's from an animal. But if it's anything else?
A yarmulke?
Yarmulke, maybe yarmulke. Let's go with see here, I'm gonna add something. Is matzah holy? See, earlier I said it may not be, right? Well, matzah that's actually eaten on Passover at the Seder, right? So you've taken something that grew from the ground, and now you did a mitzvah with it, or a lulav and etrog. Okay, let's go with that. Okay, what's the middle ground? Obviously, all kosher food, right? Kosher food. So all your kosher food that grows in the ground. Then unholy would be things that are unkosher of the plant world, which we discussed. Non-kosher plant. Plant food. Okay. Now here is where it gets more complicated. So basically, in these middle items, I'm not going to go through the rest of the list. I could keep going, but the basic idea is in the middle field. This is where your choice matters. So if you take kosher food and you do a mitzvah with it, it obviously goes to the holy side. If you eat kosher food and you do something unholy with it, so for example, I don't know, you feed it at a local, I don't know, you could take kosher food and like I said, you could mix it with meat and milk, but there's other non-kosher things you could do with it. What if I just eat food? What if I just eat food? Is it going to any side?
If you don't
Thoughts?
bless it, it's
What?
probably, if you don't bless it, it's probably going to forbid or I'm not sure what you're calling that, unholy side.
Well, right. You're saying if you eat food and you don't bless it. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, we will develop this. This is our question that we're going to have to discover. So he says like this. See, he's going to say like this. So he said on the previous page that okay, let's read. All right, so what happens if you eat? So now he's talking about if you eat without intention for heaven. So he says like this: if this activity was not carried out for the sake of heaven, but rather it is motivated by the body's will, its desire for lust. So he's saying any action, speech, or thought in worldly activities that is not directed towards God. So it's obviously not, remember, going back to our previous discussion, right? So if you do an activity that's not holy, so let's say, right, so we're talking about activities over here. So let's say you talk, you go to, let's hit the gym again, because we love talking about the gym. You hit the gym and you weren't thinking about anything holy. You weren't thinking about anything holy. You just hit the gym, right? It's motivated by the body's will, its desire, and lust. As we learned in chapter 6, an activity might serve either to enhance awareness of the divine energy, which saturates the universe, or to reinforce the ego. Even an ostensibly kosher activity will bolster the ego unless it is consciously aligned with God, since the physical desires of the body are naturally self-serving. A kosher activity will strengthen the klipa, even if the real bodily need for continued living, so long as your intention is not for the sake of heaven, namely to worship God at a later point using the body. So you hit the gym, and you didn't have in mind to serve God, but you didn't either have in mind to hit the gym so you can beat someone up, right? It's two different things. Understand? There's two reasons you could be going to the gym. You could be going to the gym for holy reasons. You could be going to the gym for unholy reasons, or you could just be going to the gym because you want to exercise, right? So which one was it? Nothing right now. So where does this fall into? So he says like this: even if a kosher activity is devoid of pleasure-seeking intent and is carried out purely to maintain a healthy body, it will strengthen klipa so long as God has not entered your consciousness. While this conclusion may seem harsh, it is consistent with the Tanya's core principle: either an act is directed towards God or it is not. There are no spiritually neutral activities. So he says like this. All these unawakened acts, spoken words, and thoughts are not superior to the animal soul's energy itself, which is focused on the self. Just as you cannot lift yourself up by grabbing your own hair, no force in the universe can transcend its own source without outside assistance. If an act is motivated exclusively by the animal soul, which is powered by self-centered klipa, it simply cannot awaken to God. So I know I'm being very confusing over here, and this is a deep topic, but it will get simpler as we go on. So just hold on here with a thought. And he says like this: and it is the same for all kosher objects and activities, as well as the animal soul itself, are powered metaphysically by the second higher level within the klipas and the sitra achra, which is the fourth klipa, referred to the bright klipa, because while predominantly self-centered, it contains a little bit making it bright. So again, so you've done an activity and you had no intention in mind except for self. Not necessarily bad. So this is considered part of it's klipa, it's unholy, but it's not completely in the forbidden side. Why? Because, as we're going to say, you can elevate it. As he's going to say, an act powered by klipa is not going to either promote ego consciousness or could bring you to awareness of God. The two possibilities are suggested by its name. On the one hand, if it is a self-serving klipa, peel, which conceals God's presence, but on the other hand, it is bright and does not eclipse God fully, still it is classified as klipa. a negative life force, since it's pulled towards ego consciousness predominance. It is a thick veil which lets only a little light through. All right, so who's confused? Hopefully a couple of you, right? So I'm wondering if I should continue reading in the text because it gets a little confusing. So what I want to say is ultimately, it's up to you. That's really the idea. So there's two options with this middle world, as we're going to discover as we present it. There's option number one, which is to begin with, you do the middle ground activity with the right intentions. That's the best case scenario, okay? That's the best case scenario. So you hit the gym because you want to become a security guard at Chabad, okay? All right, there's other reasons, of course. You want to be healthy so you can do mitzvahs, so you can walk to shul. You can also hit the gym to beat up people, okay? That's another option. Let's say you just hit the gym without any, you just want to hit the gym. Now, after you've hit, and I don't think that's how you spell gym, but that's another story. After you hit the gym, you now have a choice how to use that energy, right? In other words, you are now a healthier person. Now, what are you going to do with that extra energy that you have? That's an important question. In other words, are you now going to use that energy for good, or are you going to use it for not good? Or let's take a simpler example, kosher food. So you ate kosher food without any intention of doing a mitzvah. You were just hungry, okay? But now that you've already eaten, you're going to take that energy and you're going to do a mitzvah with it, or you're going to do something holy. You're going to do the right thing with it, okay? So now because it was to begin with, klipat noga, because it was the bright klipa, you can actually elevate the energy of that kosher food to holiness. Even though when you ate it with the wrong intention, you can elevate it to an extent. Tanya is going to discuss later to an extent because you ate it with the wrong intentions. There's a part of it that will not be elevated, but that's not for right now. The main point here is that the intermediate stuff, even if you start off on the wrong foot, in other words, even if you don't originally do it with the right intention, because it's considered the bright klipa, the klipa that can be elevated, because it's not completely ego-centered, therefore it can be elevated. Conversely, if you ate something not kosher, no matter what you try to do later, you can never pull it over to this side. It will never, ever have the possibility of being elevated. That's number one I want to tell you. So again, number one, anything that falls in the middle category of your life has the potential of being elevated. And that's really good. That's really important. So, people were worried in the past. Well, it's hard to keep in mind, the right intentions all day. It's hard to go to business all day and have the right mind. It's hard to sit in the gym all day. And we discussed that last time. But here what we're saying is, even if, let's say, you did it without the right intentions, but you didn't do it with the wrong intentions, okay? You can afterwards elevate that, right? So you worked hard, you gave a portion of it to tzedakah, you do mitzvahs with your life, you have now elevated all of that work, okay? Even if you didn't start off with the right intention. But here's the next thing that I want to point out, and that is that Judaism's view is that although the world is not evil. This is why in Judaism we don't separate from the world. Judaism doesn't have some belief that marriage is a problem. Judaism doesn't have a belief, because all these things that we think of in life, okay, everything, marriage, video games, really everything. Again, there are some bad video games, but I'm saying everything in life can fall in the middle category, right? That's the idea. It's the question of, will it ultimately serve a surrender towards God or will it not? So this is what's really hard. And this is why when we had the question earlier, what was easier? Is it studying the Torah, study Torah, or dinner, right? What's easier? Well, because dinner falls in the middle level, it's a lot harder. So this is why, in a sense, people who live in the business world, or people who are not involved in holy activities all day, like let's say I am to an extent, it's very impressive, because you spend most of your day in this column, and you have to find ways to bring them all over this way. That's a lot harder than living in this column. That's why a lot of people like to live this life, It's a lot easier, but God really wants us to spend a lot of time over here and pull these items this way and try to make sure we don't pull them that way. This is what life is about. And Judaism really loves this, because the whole idea is to elevate the world, is to lift up the world. This is why, for example, the Nazir, people have heard of the Nazir, the Nazirite. It says the Nazirite who forbids himself from shaving his hair and drinking wine. It says the Nazirite, when he finishes his Nazirite process, he has to do teshuvah. He has to repent. He has to bring a sin offering. Why, it says? Because he forbade on himself things that God allows. In other words, he forbade on himself to drinking wine. Yes, maybe he needed it, but God really doesn't want us to stop drinking wine. God wants us to take the wine and elevate it. This is why there's an often quoted, or I should say misquote, from the Bible. In the Bible, it says, in the Talmud says, you will be asked when you get to heaven. I have to look up the quote. You will be asked when you get to heaven, what pleasures of the world did you deny yourself? Let's see. Let me see. Here it is. Okay, here's the source. The Talmud says, when you get to heaven, this is in a Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. In the future, one will be judged for all that his eyes saw and he didn't eat. Rabbi Laser worried about this opinion and set aside money to eat from every kind once a year. So that's the Talmud. The Talmud says, when you get to heaven, you'll be judged for every type of food that you saw and you didn't eat. So how do we understand this? So many people like to take it and say, well, obviously this means we have to live a life full of pleasure. We have to keep eating wonderful, delicious, yummy foods and make sure I partake of every Mars bar. So first of all, number one, I'm going to say is the food they had back in the Talmud times is not the same as they have today. But number two is, I think it's really like this, is the idea is that it doesn't mean to live a gluttonous life. I don't think that's what the Talmud's idea is. The Talmud's idea is, I think what we're saying here is that we have to mostly live in that middle column, and living a life of denial is not correct. And this actually was something that the Baal Shem Tov was very much into. Before the times of the Baal Shem Tov, many of the Hasidic masters, or not Hasidic masters, sorry, it was very popular in those days. It came from a lot of the Ashkenaz. They very much liked this idea of living a life of denial and a life of suffering and pain, and they would roll around in the snow and things like that. And Hasidism came to say that no, we're not living an ascetic lifestyle. We need to live within the world. We discussed this last week as well. So that's really what the Talmud is saying, in my understanding. The Talmud is saying that you have a life to live. Don't keep trying to escape to the study hall. Yes, you should go and study every moment you have, but recognize that your mission is maybe to be in business. There are many business people who come to the Rebbe and say, Rebbe, I have so much money, I want to retire and I want to study Torah all day. And the Rebbe would tell them, no, you have possibly a mission in the business world because of your unique position. Yes, you have enough money to live, but it's not just about the money. Number one. Number two, obviously the money, you can do great things with your money, but he wouldn't necessarily tell people all the time to just quit their business and go study. Depended every case, but that's the idea. Is the middle column is not just necessary, but it's important. It's not just a necessary evil, but in many ways it's the ultimate goal, and it's the hardest part of our lives to elevate. As the rabbis say in Ethics of Our Fathers, everything that God created in this world, lo baro ela lekvodo, God created it for his honor, for his glory. If everything is created for God's glory, then we should find ways to elevate the things around us and not just be in a world of denial. This is why, just another example about the table, it says that a table is like a mizbech, it's like the altar of God. That's why we put salt on it. An altar always has salt. That's why we're not supposed to sit on tables, because tables are like the altar of God. So all of this is to tell us that the body is an important thing. Okay. let's read some more text. And let's talk about what happens when you make mistakes. Okay, so let's see. So he says like this. Let's go back inside the text. Sorry if it's confusing. This text is a little bit confusing, but that's how it is. Okay. So we said, we say like this little good is the source of the positive qualities of the animal soul of Israel. Explain. Okay, we discussed that in the previous chapter. The bright klipa is an intermediate category between the three completely impure klipos and the realm of holiness. The Tanya's worldview, the closest thing to a spiritually neutral activity, is an experience which is unawakened but technically kosher. Right now, the act eclipses God and nourishes self-centered consciousness, so it is categorized as klipa, right? It's not holy when you eat kosher food without any intention, because ultimately there's an element of ego. But being a radiant klipa, which is very thinly veiled, its energy is easily redeemable. And so he says like this. This is the important part, where he's saying how you can pull this intermediate to the two directions. That is why sometimes klipas noga will be absorbed by the three impure klipot, those are the totally unholy side, and nourish self-centered consciousness, as it is stated in Eitz Chaim, section 49, beginning of chapter 4, cited in Zohar, right? So if I eat like a glutton, and I just focus on my pleasure and me, 100%, even if all the food is kosher, it's going to become absorbed in the three impure klipos, because if the more ego of myself is involved, the less God there is, the less surrender there is to God. Okay, so that's why kosher is a very interesting thing. Kosher, all kosher means is just the middle ground. Right? And people say, well, it's kosher, right? Well, yes, an item can be kosher, but it's what you do with the kosher item that makes a difference. So eating in a kosher restaurant, the kosher food is kosher, but how you eat it and what you do with it. All right, he says like this. But sometimes it will be uplifted and absorbed in the realm of holiness. Right? So you have the option whenever you eat. However, for klipas noga act or entity to be redeemed from its self-centered or a process of refinement must occur, namely when the good mixed in it is extracted from the bad, empowering the good to be uplifted and holiness absorbed by it. Metaphysically, this would happen when you mentally aligned an ordinary, worldly, but kosher act with a higher purpose. The mental awakening empowers the good trapped in the bright klipa to be extracted and good. So he's going to give an example. And before he gives the example, I want to ask a question. Based on what I'm saying here, that basically there are kosher activities, and it's how you act within those kosher activities that defines whether this item will be absorbed in the three impure klipos or will be absorbed in the three in the one holy side. I'll give you three scenarios. So let's say I like barbecued meat, and in every opportunity I get, I'm going to eat barbecued meat. At home, I barbecue all the time. When I go to a restaurant, I always order barbecued meat. Is my eating barbecued meat? Obviously, the meat itself is kosher. Is that meat? Is that eating the meat? Is that going to be absorbed in the holy, or is it going to go in the unholy? Or another example. Let's say there's somebody who really loves how their house looks. And so they spend lots of time, lots of effort, lots of money into decorating their house. Okay, so let's say you have a house, right? You go to Home Goods, you go to Home Depot, and you're always fixing up your house and always making new features and new fancy things in your house. Are you going to say that that's definitely centered around the ego and that's bad? And one final example is, let's say you enjoy skiing. Okay, so you travel all over the world to find the best ski places, and you're always going skiing. What would you say? Are these holy or unholy? Any thoughts? Is this being absorbed in the holy or the unholy?
I think a lot of what you're saying is your needs and desires. You need the barbecue meat, you need the the skiing, you need, but to what, you haven't told us to what purpose this, eating barbecue meat, to what purpose? I mean, does it give you a good feeling that you go ahead and you then go and decide, okay, I had my barbecue meat, I'm gonna go study Torah? I mean, it all depends what you're doing. The skiing, I'm not sure about, because I don't ski.
So 1 second. So let's ask an example about barbecue meat. It's a good point. But why do I need to eat barbecued meat to study Torah? Why can't I just eat peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
You could, but it depends on you.
Right. So if I love barbecued meat, and I could eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that would give me enough energy to study, but instead I'm eating barbecued meat. Can I go around saying my eating the barbecued meat was holy?
If you use it for performing a mitzvah, studying Torah, yes, because then you elevated it.
So you can elevate it to an extent, but the lustful desire within the eating could be a problem. So we're differentiating here. Actually, it's an interesting differentiation. In other words, there's the energy of the food itself, which I would say could be elevated, but let's say the lustful desire in the activity itself, is that a problem or not?
Yes, it's a problem.
It could be. Or let's say let's give another example. Rabbi gives sermons, and before the rabbi gives a sermon, he tells a joke. Is that okay? You could listen to this without a joke. It's not okay.
It's never okay.
It depends. If it's Pinchas Adler, it's not okay.
Depends who's telling the joke, right? Right? Is the joke, or could you say
the joke may bring that topic down to the level where people may appreciate it more. So the joke itself, if it's related and not offensive and draws people into the study, then it's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that should be elevated.
Right. And how about this person that wants a fancy house? Is it a bad thing to want nice things in your house? What could be good about constantly, repainting your house and putting down nice floors, and where's the holiness in that?
What are you using the house for? Are you using it to invite people over?
I use it for mitzvahs, but technically I can have a $1 floor. I don't need the designer floor, right?
Sure.
All right, so let's read the next section of the Tanya, which is, I think, most important over here. And ultimately, it goes back to the beginning of the class where we said it's harder to eat dinner than it is to study Torah. So it says like this. For example, eating marbled meat and fragrant wine to broaden your mind for God and His Torah, as Rabbi said, wine and fragrance sharpens the mind. Or if you enjoy food and drink to fill the midst of taking pleasure on Shabbos and festivals, then the meat and wine's klipas no energy is refined and it ascends to God like a burnt offering and a sacrifice. So what he's saying here is like this. Maybe you're right. Maybe you could study Torah without eating good food. I'll get to Shabbos in a moment because Shabbos is a totally different level. But if drinking wine and eating good meat puts you in that type of mood, similar to the joke, as we're going to discuss in a second, but allows you the broadness of the mind to be able to study properly, to be able to do mitzvahs with a good disposition, then that is holy in itself. So yes, I could study Torah with just the peanut butter sandwich, but if I eat peanut butter sandwiches every day, I know myself, I'd probably be in a very maybe a mellow type of disposition. Well, I want to feel broad and I want to be able to sit and study. And so sometimes doing all those things enables you to broaden your mind. And so the same thing might be about your house, by the way. You may need to have a beautiful house in order to have the broad-mindedness. It depends on your disposition. I can't tell, everybody's going to be different. You may need the nice house in order to sit and feel comfortable in your mind and settled to be able to study. So he says, all right, so he says like this. Another example is to use humor to sharpen your mind. And to put you in a joyous mood for God, His Torah, and His worship, which ought to be carried out joyously, as Rabbi did with his students when he commenced with a humorous remark to them and the students will become cheerful. Judaism doesn't require you to desist from worldly activities and pleasures. If they are kosher and good within themselves, they can be elevated like a sacrifice to God, so long as they are performed with an awakened consciousness aligned to a higher purpose. All right. As he just I want to read the flip side of that. On the other hand, if you're one who gorges on meat and guzzles wine, purely to satisfy the desires of your body and your animal soul, which come from the element of water, from the negative side of the four elements, which is pleasure seeking, then the energy, the meat, or the wine inside of you will be absorbed temporarily in complete negativity of the three impure klipos as you become a garment and vehicle for them. Unlike an act powered by the three completely negative klipos, as evil is not redeemable, a kosher act which is marred by a self-gratifying intention will only strengthen the negative forces temporarily until you repent and return to the worship of God and His Torah. And so he's going to go on to say that, and maybe we'll have to get to it more next week, but this is a fascinating example, again, where you ate something kosher with the wrong intentions, totally gluttonous intentions, therefore it descended to the three impure klipos. But if you do the right thing later, you can elevate it, but even when you elevate it, there will always remain a part of it stuck because of your intentions, because there was a high element of ego, at least when you ate it. In other words, even if the food itself can be elevated and the energy itself can be elevated, your intentions while eating it possibly cannot be elevated because your intentions were very self-serving and there's no surrender in your self-servingness. So this is basically what we're going to get here is that Judaism is actually very difficult. In other words, a religion that knocks the physical life, a Judaism that says physical life is bad and evil and needs to be avoided at all costs is actually very easy. It's a much easier life. Because you just avoid it, you don't do it, you don't get involved within it, and you do it just to the minimal whenever possible. But Judaism has an outlook that presents the possibility for everybody has a unique situation, and everybody has their own presents for a unique situation, which really it's hard for me to judge. You have to know in yourself. In other words, why am I eating right now? And maybe, yes, you do like steak, okay? But am I eating the steak merely because steak tastes good? Or is it also by me enjoying the steak, I'll be able to study, okay? And so that's, and you can tell, by the way, the difference is he said gluttonous, right? If there's a food that you like, you definitely don't need to eat it gluttonously in order to in order to be in broad-minded, right? Gluttonous never doesn't feel good ever. So that's one way. Also, let's give, for example, if you want to keep beautifying your house, I think if you're obsessed about beautifying your house, it's probably unhealthy and it's probably not the holy, beautifying your house, expanding your mind that we talk about. The Talmud does say that three things broaden a person's mind. It says, a good marriage, a good house, and good things in the house. So there is an element that having a good life can broaden your mind. And this can go back to skiing. Maybe somebody needs to go skiing. It helps keep them in a good frame of mind, a good mood. It's their vacation, it's their breakaway. But it's possible that an obsession with it to the point where it's about the skiing itself and not necessarily what it can bring you in your life, that can become a problem. And so it's really a hard thing to say. I'll just give a couple other stories. The Talmud tells a story that one time a great rabbi was standing next to Elijah the prophet, and Elijah the prophet told him, "Look, those two people, they have a portion of the world to come." So the rabbi ran over to these people, wanted to know what they do. Are they Torah scholars or something? He asked them, "What do you do?" They said, "We're jesters. Our job is to make people laugh." And Elijah said, "These people are going to get heaven because they are putting people in a good mood." But what I'm saying today is very dangerous because, again, you can take it and understand it in a way that and you can abuse this idea as well. And say, well, this is all to broaden my mind and abuse it. So we have to always keep the goal in mind. The goal is never for the steak itself. The goal is never for the skiing itself. The goal is not for the meat itself. The goal is for the broadness of mind that it will bring me. And, sometimes for some people, they say vacations make them more stressed. If that's how it goes for you, it's probably not worth it. just to I had another example.
Rabbi, can you explain what you mean by broaden your mind?
Broaden your mind. You want to be in the mind has to be settled, and there's a word in Yiddish called breitkeit, literally means broad. We have to be able to think. Judaism has a lot of metaphysical discussions. You have to be able to think out of the box, and you need to be settled. You don't want to be in a very tight feeling, very small-minded. I don't know. I have to think of other words.
So
sorry.
not agitated. Not agitated. You want a calm
Well,
mind.
you don't want to be very concrete.
Yeah. You need to be able to think beyond linear, basically. A linear thinking can only get you so far. You need to be able to come up with better ideas. So when you study Talmud, you come to a question. When you study Tanya, you have to broaden your mind. Think about it. Tanya is not a simple, straightforward. You have to have a more broad look. So these are all places where having a broad mind can help. So if someone's coming to a Tanya class and hoping for, I'm going to tell you, how to, make a right, make a left, make a right, make a left. It's not like that. You need a broad mind to study it, right? It's a little out of the box. It's a little metaphysical. We're running out of time. I wanted to just tell one final story before you go. I'm going to have to expand on this topic again next week. But the story was that one time the Rebbe liked art. In other words, when I say he liked art, he wanted people to use their talents and everything they have in this world. So there was once an artist, Rebbe pushed him to go into art. He says, you can express religious things in art. So he one time put up a show in 770. He put up a art display, and the Rebbe walked through everything. And when the Rebbe finished, he says, listen, I love your art, but he told him it's too spiritual. The depictions are very spiritual. He says, I want you to draw more concrete items, draw, holy scenes, a Shabbos scene, a synagogue scene, something more concrete than the ethereal themes. So the same thing is in our lives. Is it's amazing to live a spiritual life, live in the ether, live in Torah study. But ultimately, God wants us in the concrete. He wants us to do mitzvahs here in this physical world in ways that are, it's difficult. It's very difficult. And we each have to judge with ourselves these activities that we're doing. Are they holy? Are they not? But that's ultimately, God wants us living in that middle ground. And always to try and live there, but you'd always try and have the right intention, which is surrender to God and not just self-serving, but how this will serve and further my religious life. And that's what I'm going to leave you with today. Just make